Our final speaker on this panel is Vanessa Stovall, who is a first-year master's student at the University of Vermont and studies ancient music, performance, and hair. Vanessa's talk today is titled Cosmetic Designs, Divine Outfits, and Influencers in the Posthumous Trilogy of Euripides. Please welcome Vanessa.
Thank you so much. Oh, whoops. That go? Yes. Oh, nope. Sorry, it's like stuck on a, yes, we said open. Oh, no. Does that still go? Sorry, it's going on here, but not on here, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Oh, wait, I might have figured it out. There we go. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about the final posthumous trilogy of Euripides, and only just sort of one root word that I keep tracing and keep sort of building my own conclusions about. So the final plays of Euripides, Bacchae, Iphigenia and Alice, and Alcmaeon and Corinth, are the most complete trilogy of classical tragedies after Aeschylus's Oresteia that we have from the extant corpus. And yet, due to its disparate subject matter and fragmentary nature, the trilogy is rarely considered as a cohesive whole in scholarship, which also might have something to do with the fact that we tend to conceive of trilogies in our own contemporary as a single contiguous story told over 3 parts, much like George Lucas. But we know from ancient scholarship that the trilogies submitted to the city Dionysia in the 5th century were not always of contiguous stories and often would have different subject matter and yet have similar themes throughout. And so with a lot of attention paid to the Oresteia as a complete trilogy, I was also wondering about what we would do if we would look at our second most complete trilogy and try to treat it as such, or look at the different threads or thematic elements that tie it together. And also, I am a student of ancient music and composition, and so this is a part of larger studies around aesthetics of Euripidean music, where I follow in the footsteps of, for example, Naomi Weiss's 2018 novel, or not novel, book, Anna Conser's 2021 dissertation, and of course the wonderful John Franklin from University of Vermont, whose concert we should all go to immediately after this. And so this presentation is considering the deployment of different Cosm roots in the trilogy as a thread to link these different pieces together and to look at the broader thematic style of Euripides. First, let's take a look at Cosmos and how I define it. It has multiple meanings in the Greek, in the sense of order, of ornament or adornment, of mode or fashion, of lawful order or government, or the entire universe, as we get etymologically in English, the cosmos, or, as I tend to like to use it, every existential meaning of makeup, which is why I have the cosmetic with parentheticals. And so this entire presentation is a part of a larger project where I'm tracking every single extant use of Cosm roots in not only Euripides and his 72 instances of it, but as well as all of 5th century drama. So Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Aristophanes as well. And actually I have so many thoughts about particularly the Antigone and Cosm roots, because that's one of the biggest clusters we have of Sophocles' uses of them, and I think they have a lot of influence on early Euripides, but there's simply no time to get into that. And so as Euripides has the most overwhelming use, which is unsurprising given his large corpus, I wanted to sort of look at how they show up in this final trilogy. So a quick note on Cosm roots. So in his earliest plays that we have, especially the Alcestis and Medea, Cosmos or cosmoi tend to be centered specifically around death and around the garb that people wear to die, such as Alcestis's funerary adornments and the deadly finery that Medea uses to kill her romantic rival. And going from middle to late Euripides, we see that the word itself takes on more meta-theatrical aspects of cosmos, especially relating back to the costuming that happens on the stage. And so this presentation is focused on his final uses, which all come in the same year, and are his largest cluster of cosmos, all happening in a single instance. And so let us move to cosmos and cosm roots in the Bacchae. So throughout the play, they trace a notable meta-theatrical use of the word, all centered in the very middle of the play. Our first instance comes from the third episode, when the messenger reports of the fine order that the three daughters of Cadmus waking up, which each of their respective groups or choruses, and they all rise up in unison. He says, "They stood up straight, a marvel of fine order to behold." And so these three choruses echo the choruses of the tragic trilogy that were standard each year across the theater of Dionysus. And when Pentheus realizes that he must discuss himself in order to investigate these women, he uses Cosmos to ask about the form of his costume. And what will the second fashion of my costume be? The use of costume draws to the mind the dressing up as actors as characters across gender lines in ancient drama. When he gets his cousin back into the house to put on his disguise, Dionysus again uses Cosmos to describe these fine trappings and links them to Pentheus's upcoming demise, which again harkens back to Euripides' use of Cosmos in his earliest extant plays as a death garb. He says, "But now I must take Pentheus to trick out his fit as he departs into Hades, slaughtered from his mother's hand." Oh, and as a note, I forgot to say, all of the Cosmos translations are my own, and I've tried to do as many different applications of the definition. And so after being dressed up in this death garb, finally, when Pentheus comes back out, he confesses that he messed up his hairstyle indoors dancing around in his room, and Dionysus fixes his hair. Pentheus then refers to Dionysus as his hairdresser, or Cosme, which I've rendered here as stylist. There, you are my stylist, for I am entirely devoted to you. So the cosm roots throughout the Bacchae are all centered around the influence of Dionysus as a stylist towards his cousin as he dresses him up for death, which positions the god as concerned with the cosmos of both his city and his stage as a costumer and a stylist. Moving on to the Iphigenian Alice, we get cosm roots more spread out throughout the text than in the Bacchae, though they do follow a very similar medical theatrical thread, which also bears a strong thematic resonance with the events of the plot of the Bacchae as well. The first instance comes from Agamemnon in episode 1, questioning the conflict at his door between his messenger and his brother, when he asks, "What is this confusion, these disordered words at my gate?" Which again draws to mind the fact that the majority of tragic dialogue is speech moving from order to disorder outside of a door on a skene. The chorus picks up this consideration of cosmos in their first stasimon as they consider the role of cosmos in a city as synonymous with masculine virtue. A great thing to hunt virtue. For women, it is down in Cyprus's cleft, and men, it is when good order, flowing infinitely, increases greatness in a city. This gender juxtaposition of women doing activities in secret with men seeking civic order speaks to the central plot of the Bacchae, the young king Pentheus attempting to maintain order as various choruses of women go off in secret. The chorus develops this parallel further by also singing about a god as a hairdresser, as they do in their second stasimon in an attempt to prophesize the future violence that the Achaean soldiers represent for the women of Troy. They say, "There I hear Cassandra whips her amber curls in a green-leaved crown of laurel, accessorized whenever the god's mantics should pant with compulsion." The final instance of Cosm roots is probably spurious, but still worth mentioning. An instance from episode 3 with Achilles speaking of the further bloodshed that will ornament his spear in the future wartime conflict, securing the prophetic lyrics of the chorus in the second Stasimon, when he says, "For Ares, as much as is within me, I will adorn my spear." This also sort of draws a parallel to the fact when Agave comes at the end of the Bacchae holding her son Pentheus's head on a stick or spear, and the meta-theatrical aspect of the thyrsus, which is also supposed to represent Dionysus. So in contrast, throughout Iphigenia and Alice, the Cosm roots are dispersed throughout the text and centered around the influence of gods, multiple, on the rapidly shifting circumstances of the various characters. Now, throughout both plays, these roots are clustered around how gods affect the character's physical appearance and mentality. I put two parenthetical puns in the title of this paper to try and illustrate the fascinating phenomenon around the matching of external style and internal organization that is present in the hairdressing that Dionysus does to Pentheus and that Apollo does to Cassandra. In Bacchae, Pentheus begins to see various images, including his cousin through different animal aspects as he becomes dressed as a woman. Through his outfit, he begins to have fits. In Iphigenia and Alice, Cassandra gains a laurel crown through the force of Apollo's oracular breathing. She becomes an influencer, a displayer of the brand of Apollo's power through his oracular influence. Now, I'm very focused on the representations that hair follow and how hair itself and hair adornments end up being the physical representation of these internal mentalities, as it tends to happen in late 5th century drama. So, turning back to the Thesmophoria Zeusai, from Aristophanes, we get a fascinating quote about a garland seller, as the women who are putting Euripides on trial, who says that she is losing out on her industry because he is making people atheists, she says. But now this guy who composes the tragedy in the tragedy market has persuaded the men that gods don't exist, so my sales aren't even half of what they were. I therefore urge and advise all women to punish this man for his many crimes, for wild are his attacks upon us, since he himself was raised among wild herbs. But I'm off to the market. I've got an order to plait garlands for a group of 20 men. Now, these representations of the external and internal also show up across Bacchae and Iphigenia and Alice. Pentheus, as he is slowly beginning to lose his mind, is characterized as the opposite by his cousin in episode 4. He says, "Might I be able to pick up the glens of Cathiron on my shoulders and the Bacchants with them?" And Dionysus affirms that you might if you wanted. Your previous mental state was not sound, but now you have the thoughts that you ought to after he has dressed him up. Cassandra herself is an unfortunate Apollonian influencer with her own prophetic flow, flowing and foreshadowing into what the chorus later, foreshadowing what the chorus later realizes is going to happen to Iphigenia, as becomes present throughout their choral odes. First, in the second Stasimon, after they sing of Cassandra, they prophetically sing of the foreshadowing that will happen to the Trojan women, which is also itself a call back to Euripides' earlier plays portraying such, where they sing the women's, they sing of the women singing of their own future in a very meta-theatrical aspect, wondering and foreshadowing, what man then, tightening his grasp on my luxuriant hair to make me weep, shall pluck me from my perished fatherland? They later take these metaphors around hair and violence as they sing in their third Stasimon of Iphigenia and her fate coming up. But you, maiden, the Greeks shall garland about your fair tresses like some dappled hind of the mountain from a rocky cave, or a spotless heifer bloodening your mortal neck. And then in their final song, when they are called back to sing by Iphigenia in her second monody / the kolmos that they form with her in the end, they lament her finally, saying, See her, the sacker of Ilium and Phrygians, going on her way, destined to have her head garlanded and sprinkled to stain the goddess's altar and her lovely body's throat with the drops of her flowing blood. So we see the association and the linkage between the internal mental state around centering on belief of these different tragic heroes as being represented through their external headgear. And so it's from these different patterns and considerations through the cosmetic designs of the gods that I would like to turn to the final instance of Cosm that I have been interested in and fixated on for some time now. Euripides fragment 79, which I think should be attributed to Alcmaeon in Corinth. It is currently unattributed to either Alcmaeon in Corinth or Solpsis, having been quoted by Strobaeus as just one of Euripides' Alcmaeon plays. However, thinking through the different levels of cosmos, especially with Euripides in the latter end of his oeuvre, I would like to consider this tiny fragment. For humans, what exceeds the middle produces disorders. Mortals are not fit to bear the makeup of gods in Alcmaeon in Corinth. This is partly also due to different intertextual similarities in the Bacchae in Iphigenia and Alice, particularly around holding to the middle that we see from both of the first Stasimons in the play, from Bacchae holding to the middle due to the excess of Dionysus, whereas in Iphigenia and Alice holding to the middle due to the excess of Aphrodite. But through the consideration of how Cosmos is developed through both plays, we also see that mortals themselves, humans, are not fit to bear the makeup of gods, specifically thinking through Cosmos in terms of headgear and how that has influenced them. We see what happens to Pentheus, to Cassandra, and eventually to Iphigenia as well through these cosmetic designs. While they may be not excellent for mortals or the makeup of humans, they are fantastic for the makeup of tragedy. Thank you.
Vanessa. So, there's another clothing scene in the Bacchae at the very beginning of the Bacchae between Tiresias and Cadmus, and then Pentheus comes on and sees them wearing the outfit of the gods, and there's no Cosmos words there.
No.
Do you have any hypotheses as to why? Because that would seem to beg to be, we're talking about outfits there explicitly, and yet we're not going to make a comment on, my God, Granddad, put that outfit away.
Well, part of this is because there's a large sort of group of words. So I got into that a little bit when we got into the ultraviolet section. There we go. When I switched the purples that I was using to start talking about things like Posthumous, steppe, and all these words associated with hair that I've been cataloging and looking at specifically. So we do get a lot of other terminology around clothing in those scenes, but not specifically Cosmos. And so for me, and a lot of what I've been studying around Cosm roots in Euripides, is that he does have very specific reasons why he's using it. And so this presentation was partly sort of trying to eke out some of those nuances from this biggest cluster of his that we have. So for me, it tends to lean